manage to teach you about pumzikering. And that's what I'm doing this evening, actually. It's just that I've got a lot of things in front of me. And so I thought it would be easy if I just sit at the desk and, talk from the desk rather than actually be standing over there or standing in front of the screen, etc. But what I'm going to present to you will be on the screens, I hope, and you should be able to then see them. But I want to start with a little story, two little stories actually. I had lunch today with Samia Morali. As you probably know, he's the chairman of the Samia group, and Sassini, which Caesar was talking about, is one of the companies in that particular group. We were actually saying goodbye to our company secretary. She was leaving the company. She's now joining Equity Bank. But Samia is actually going to Thailand for Christmas. And I bring that up because of the fact that I recently received an email from Thailand, and it was from a lady called Flatchen Jagi. Flatchi actually studied CPA in Strathmore. She was on a scholarship here. She worked her way up to PwC in Kigali. And on the 5th of January last year, she started with Deloitte's in London. In December last year, she came as a Muzungu tourist down to a hotel in Mombasa. And as I say, a few weeks ago, she was in Thailand telling me about the different types of food that they have there, which also Samia Morali was talking about. So it's just that, the money that you're actually paying for this lecture is not coming to me. I thought, it's just important that you're clear about that. It's actually going for the benefit of students. That, there is a lady who's coming in to Nairobi in a few days' time. She's working, Henrietta Musyoki. She's actually working in EY in Bermuda, and she was also a scholarship student here, but she's now, as I say, working in Bermuda. She's coming back for the holidays, and then of course she'll go back in the new year. So, but one of the things I'm very, very keen on is getting students jobs. And there was a young student from Ndumberi, because that's where the Sassini office actually, well, their farm is there more than the office. And I told this young man, I said, look, now look, this job is very, very important for you. And you've got to think out of the box. So anyway, he went into the interview, and I was sitting at the back of the room so I could hear what was going on. And the interviewer asked him, he says, look, how many days of the week begin with a T? And quick as a flash, this young man said 2. And he says, okay, which are those days? Today and tomorrow. So the fellow was a bit taken aback, and he thought, okay, well, let's see. I'd also asked him, I said, look, take a calculator on, because maybe you're going to have to do a calculation there, and just impress the guy with your calculation ability. And the fellow said, well, how many seconds are there in a year? And he started working it out, 60 multiplied by... And then he thought, now wait a moment, think outside the box. It says 12. 12? What do you mean by 12? Well, the 2nd of January, the 2nd of February, the 2nd of March, He said, now, what's God's second name? And this was quite a religious young man. He knew Yahweh and Allah and, all sorts of different things. And then he thought, oh, you're from Ndumberi, you see. Herod. Herod? What do you mean, Herod? Yes, Herod. How Herod? Well, it's simple. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, people really talk about research today. And, You know, I was reading an article on ESG reporting because a lot of studies have actually been done on ESG reporting, academic studies. And, you know, this thing of research, well, you know, it's very important that we do research, but it's so important that we actually arrive, it's so important that we arrive at the truth. And, you know, I have the financial statements of East African breweries going back to 1951. And it's not that I started drinking at that age or anything of that nature, but it's just that I happened to be around when those were being disposed of. And, you know, it's very, very interesting to see the annual report of East African breweries in 1951. It was basically a 10-page document. Today, of course, if you have a look at the East African breweries' financial statements or the annual report, the integrated report, it's actually about 250 pages. But why I mention this at all is that we're talking about sustainability reporting, and the title was, you know, sustainability reporting in IFRS S1 and IFRS S2. We will get there eventually, but you know, I want to take you through a journey. And simply because, you know, if I give you a checklist of IFRS S1 and S2, you know, that's what you're going to be able to just check to see that you've covered those particular topics. And it would be rather uninteresting if in fact we were going to have a look at, let's say, the consolidation of a foreign subsidiary or East African breweries, let's say, actually acquiring a foreign subsidiary and disposing of another one and doing the cash flow statement there. That would be really interesting. But, you know, I know that you don't have an exam now. So I've got to try to make this a little bit interesting. And if I give you the checklist for IFRS S1 and IFRS S2, many of you will be out of the door there before I can say Mamangina. So, but in the 1999 annual report of East African breweries, and at that time Gerald Mahinda was the managing director, and also Kidaini, Mr. Kidaini was the, thank you very much. Mr. Kidi, is that going to, Nguka. It needs some weight there, I think. But, okay, I think you can still hear me, can you? Yes, okay. So, but anyway, Mr. Gerald Mahinda was, he's a past student actually, but he was the managing director of East African breweries, and Kidaini, who was born in 1929, he was already well past the age that you have to be a young student studying accounting in the 1970s or the 80s or the 90s or whatever. East African breweries brought in the chairman's report corporate governance. And then a little bit lower, they talk about information technology, because as you know, there was that huge, people were told if you've got a computer which is working in 1999, you know, in 2000 it's going to switch off, and you know, all that sort of stuff. They did that in order to make you buy new computers, in fact. It was a giant hoax, just like half of what the Western world speaks about. But anyway, we also have support to local economies. And, you know, in this case here, so in other words, when people say that ESG reporting started in Kenya in 2005 or something of that nature, which I've read in research articles, they're wrong. And, you know, here it says, you know, sort of, Kenya Breweries Limited continues to be one of the largest taxpayers in Kenya. We've got to remember that the banks were not doing so well in those days as they are today. And the most profitable for the shareholders of a company for last year, Equity Bank was more profitable for the shareholders of its company than the shareholders of Safaricom, just by a very small amount. But the whole profit, of course, of Safaricom was much bigger. But it's just interesting. I just thought I'd bring that up. But then also, in the year 2004, East African breweries produced the Corporate Citizenship Report 2004. They didn't do this again ever. Half of it was in Swahili and the other half in English. But here they actually speak about all of the things that you will hear us talking about today. You know, that occupational health, hospital beds for Kenya, Sickle Cell Association in Uganda, Water of Life Project in Thika, all sorts of things that they were actually talking about. And, you know, they were talking about basically not only profit. And at that time, you know, I remember interviewing one of our past students again, who was the CFO of East African Breweries at that time. He said, look, you know, we're the only company which is making a decent profit in Kenya. But in addition to that, you know, they're talking about all sorts of different things in relation to the environment, and also in relation to society, and also in relation to governance. So I mention that just so that, you know, if some of you are now, you know, so exalted that you're doing research, you know, it's so important that we do research. But, you know, I always feel that we've got to aim at the truth. And I read a paper recently that if you do ESG reporting, you're going to be more profitable. Now, I think it's very important that we think, ladies and gentlemen, because, you know, this is an academic article which says that if you do ESG reporting, you're going to make more profit. Well, isn't it more likely that if you've got a hell of a lot of profit, you can afford to do good ESG reporting? Isn't it more likely? You know, so, but, you know, it was the other way around in this article. You know, in other words, improve your ESG reporting because that's going to make you more profitable. Now, the companies, you know, the ESG reporting of Equity Bank, you know, their integrated report where they're talking about their 6 capitals, we'll come to this in a moment, but that's 33 pages long. Safaricom actually produces, they call it an annual report, but it is really an integrated report. And inside the report, their latest report that is, for the year ended the 31st of March 2024, they actually talk about it being an integrated report. It's only about 5 pages. And one of the things that I will mention here is that this integrated report has got to be concise. Because, you know, if you read the latest annual report of Equity Bank, it's 260 pages long. Well, you've got to take out 2 weeks of your life in order to get through the whole thing. And Anthony Murage, who's also a past student, he's a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers, he was actually saying, look, you know, people are producing so much volume that, you know, the quality of the reporting is somewhat wanting. You know, you want to get across a message, but you want to get it across in the most concise way possible. So anyway, let's go on to, as I say, I hope I haven't misled you, because I want to talk about sustainability reporting. I want to take you back a little bit. You know, it is very interesting, as I say, the first one to report, to produce an ESG report in Kenya was East African Breweries in 1999, okay? And as I say, they actually produced a sustainability report. They didn't call it that. The Corporate Citizenship Report 2004, which in fact, you know, wow, sometimes you don't know whether you should throw something out or keep it. I tend to go too much in the opposite direction. I keep everything. So if you go into my room, it says, you know, people say, what the hell? Paperless office? You're the opposite. But anyway, you'll forgive me, I hope. So, but I want to have a look at sustainability reporting, as I say, going back to the early days, as it were. And if we go to the next slide, please, okay, we'll see. Now, this is You know, in fact, this started a long, long time ago, and there may be some of you who are members of the, you know, the Methodist Church, okay? And John Wesley was actually the founder of the Methodist Church. And, you know, in this case here, socially responsible investing. So in other words, you want to invest in an organization that is not going to do harm to the environment. And when you talk about the environment, you talk obviously about your customers, your workers, okay? You know, the physical environment around you. One of the things that East African Breweries talks about here is that they started in their factory in Uganda is very close to the lake, and their effluent goes into the lake, but they made sure that their effluent was properly cleaned before it went into the lake, because it's water going in, and they want to make sure that it's water not, you know, mixed with a whole lot of things which are dangerous to the wildlife and so on. But anyway, in this case here, John Wesley, the founder of you know, the Methodist Church, wrote a book, or well, wrote a sermon, shall we say, The Use of Money. And in this case here, social investing, don't harm your neighbor through your business practices. In Strathmore, we have a lady again who was actually sponsored by the you know, the sponsor of the scholarship fund here. She now is running an avocado oil exporting company in the EPZ in Athi River. But she used to work in the business school for a number of years, but her husband now does farming of potatoes in Nyahururu. And a lot of the people around are actually using well, chemicals which, you know, the people around you are using chemicals and fertilizers which, you know, are not good for human beings, but they produce potatoes twice the size in half the time. So of course all those farmers are just going, you know, your health doesn't matter. And you know, he then is going to have to wait a further 45 days in order to get his crop, and they're not as big as the ones using these fertilizers. So, you know, this organic farming sounds good, but, you know, from an economic point of view, it just doesn't pay. And a lot of the tomatoes which are actually consumed in Nairobi today are grown alongside the Nairobi River, as it goes down past Kitui. On the banks of that river, you've got a lot of people who are doing farming now. They're bringing water out of the river, but the only problem is that the water has got all sorts of well, heavy metals, etc., which are not good for, well, the cattle who are actually drinking that water, and it's not good for human beings who are eating the vegetables produced in those farms. So this is one of those things that we have to try to get ESG right across the board for everyone. I think the Germans and the people in Europe have gone too far in that direction, but as far as we go in Kenya, we need to worry about that a lot more. But anyway, when we come to the next slide, okay, which is the modern era of socially responsible investing, this is something that started in the 1960s. And as I say, you know, 1999 was 39 years after 1960. But you know, when you actually talk to Mervyn King, Professor Mervyn King from South Africa, and I'm sure you've heard of the King report and, you know, corporate governance, etc. He speaks a lot about the way Nelson Mandela actually got him to get involved in that. Because Nelson Mandela realized, you know, now wait a moment, you know, it's not good that people only are thinking about the profit. They've also got to think about their own employees, how they're being looked after, how are customers being looked after, how are suppliers being looked after as well. When our CS in Treasury imposed an additional tax on Senator beer, the beer went up from 20 shillings a glass to 40 shillings a glass, and it basically, that killed the market. And so East African breweries just stopped buying any produce from the farmers. They couldn't make the beer because it wasn't selling. And it took 2 years to actually reverse that situation. I don't know what the latest position with that is now, but I think, you see, the politicians, unfortunately, they don't realize, and this is the same all over the world, you know, that in Britain now they realize they made a hell of a mistake in getting out of the European Union. And, you know, you have a 50-50 vote, that's stupidity. But, you know, politicians don't think very often. But anyway, on the next slide, okay, we go to a man. Nelson Mandela, as I say, was instrumental in Mervyn King working on the King Report, corporate governance in South Africa, and they were one of the first countries to actually use integrated reporting. But that I Have a Dream speech, which was given, I was doing my A-levels actually at that time in Strathmore. I remember I had a man, Kariuki, who was in the same room as myself. I forget the names of another people, but it was on the 28th of August 1963 that Martin Luther King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. And that really was instrumental in changing the attitude of well, the attitude is difficult to change, but it certainly changed the outcomes, okay, in the United States. More than 250,000 people are actually listening to him. Some people will say 350,000. It's always very difficult to estimate how many people were speaking to him. But, you know, he is a man who actually, you know, had an incredibly good influence in the United States. And, you know, he had a number of rules, which we can go to. The next slide, okay? So, yes, rule 1. You know, think about others first. And I think this is so important in business. You know, in other words, you're in a business, you want to make money, and you'll probably make money if you help other people make money as well. It's not a zero-sum game. And so I think it's, you know, it's something which, for example, you know, you've got to teach your sons and daughters this. This has got to become part of our culture in Kenya. Why? Because the culture in Kenya is exactly the opposite. Ni mimi, Kenya ni mimi, mimi ni Kenya. You know, we know that from the highest authorities in the land. So, you know, in this case here, one of the things that has happened, I listen a lot to a fellow called Thomas Sowell, S-O-W-E-L-L. Go to YouTube and listen to him. My goodness, what a, you know, he's actually born, he's 92, so he was born in 1930, 1 year after Kireini. But he's as lucid today as he ever was. And he's got a fantastic voice. You know, I have another person, I don't know if you know Robert Mudida from the Central Bank of Kenya. He's a man who lectures economics, and he lectures it in such a way that you just want to sit and listen to this man. You know, he's got an incredible voice, but he puts across his ideas so well. But Thomas Sowell, probably one of the cleverest people in the United States of America. And as I say, he was born in 1930s now. Well, he's getting on to his birthday is on the 30th of June. And I followed him. I've got all sorts of videos about him. And, you know, he's such a sound man. But one of the things that he mentions is the importance of growing up in a family. And that's what's destroying the United States at the moment, the breakdown in the family. And it's also destroying Kenya, you know, because we have about 400,000 babies born to girls between the ages of 12 and 18. And I can give you the statistics, you know, but in this case, every year we have those young girls giving birth, and of course they have 2 or 3 children sometimes, okay, but of course, where's the father? And I tell my class very often, there are single fathers in the class. You know, they're not only single mothers, they're single fathers as well. But anyway, the second rule is understand your own value. And I think this is so important, okay, that, you know, you've got to realize that you've got to be an influence for good. I tell my students, and I think I may have told you, and I hope I did tell you, look, Kenya works if you and I make it work. It's so important. And you know, I was at a lunch yesterday where a man who used to be at the head of the Kenya rural board in Kenya Highways. And you know, this gentleman was saying, look, you know, we've got to go and start exploring outside Kenya. Equity Bank, for example, has got a subsidiary in the DRC, and it's making an incredible amount of money. The DRC's exports are 4 times Kenya's. And it's a rich country, and you know, and you can be a first advantage mover there, okay? Just get in. I'm actually trying to get someone to, there's a rich man in Lubumbashi down in the south of DRC, just across the border from Zambia. But there's a rich man there who wants to build a hotel, and I'm trying to get a Kenyan construction company to go there to build it for him. And you know, we need to go and work abroad. Why? Because you know, business in Kenya is incredibly difficult today. I don't know whether that is your experience, but you know, and we've got to try to get it across to politicians. Look, you know, you people are destroying this country. You know, and if you continue, well, you know, I've spoken about Haiti, okay? And Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. It's been independent since the 1st of January, 1801. But the problem is it had terrible leadership. And I could tell you all sorts of stories about that. But you know, understand your own value and you know, in this particular case, be a force for good. On the next slide, okay, let's see if I can get this, okay. So rule 3 is the key to success is hard work. So, you know, this, we don't know actually that Martin Luther King was an incredibly good fundraiser. Incredibly good. And he was a man who really worked hard. You know, we listen to him and we think, well, the only thing that he did was just simply to speak, but it wasn't. And, you know, one of the things that the Chinese have proved to us is that if you want to build your country, if you want to become rich, work. Now, unfortunately, you know, our situation in Kenya, our business environment is difficult. I know a foreign investor who was saying, well, you know, he was talking to KRA. KRA had applied a huge fine on him wrongly. And he said, well, you know, look, I tell you what, if I've got to pay this fine, I might as well get out of Kenya, you know. And the head of the KRA at that particular time, it's not the same person, but the chairman of KRA at that time, I will be the first to help you get out of the country. Now, 700 jobs are lost. And, you know, for example, one of the things that happens in Central Province now is that KRA is insisting, look, if you, let's say you take a pork producer, you're selling to the market, you're going to make your sales. If you want to offset your expenses against that income, you have to have an ETIMS invoice. I know a man, he used to have pigs, I could hear them whenever I used to go up to Limuru. They're no longer there. He's growing chickens now because you can sell chickens here, there, and then, you know, little kiosks and so on. Now, Farmers' Choice has told KRA, look, I tell you what, the farmers are ready for us to deduct withholding tax, okay, so that in that particular case, we will then be able to offset this against our expenses, against our income, sorry. So, you know, in this case here, allow the farmers to just produce the pigs, bring them to us, okay, and we'll then pay them with withholding tax deducted. KRA said no. So what happens? Well, the pig farmers are no longer in Central Province producing pigs, and we are importing 2 containers of pork a week from Brazil. So, you know, sometimes the stubbornness of people, you know, in government, it's wrecking the country. You know, our exports in 2023 were 1 trillion and 4 billion. It was the first time our exports ever were above 1 trillion. But our imports were 2 trillion 612 billion. So we have a trade deficit of 1 trillion 608 billion. And thank goodness we have our diaspora. Thank goodness we've got our services are very, very important. That's all you people working in the services industries, selling services abroad, okay? And then also we've got the diaspora, the service industry, and also tourism. But, you know, we have to make our business environment so much better so that we then provide jobs. You know, I'm very, very keen to get, there are more accountants from Kenya in Bermuda than from any other country. And it's the same in the Cayman Islands. And I had lunch last Friday with a man who wants to employ 400 accountants in Jersey, in the Channel Islands. It's a tax haven. $1 trillion, $700 billion goes through Jersey every year. So, you know, we're talking about a lot of companies there. There's a lot of work. But what about work here in Kenya? You know, we have unemployed people. But anyway, in this case here, the key to success is hard work. And, you know, this man, he came to Kenya because Kenyans, there are already 2,000 Kenyans working in Jersey in the hospitality industry and also even in construction. But they will turn up for work when the people from Jersey will not, because it's cold or whatever. So this is where Kenyans abroad are really, they're doing us a tremendous amount of service by actually proving that they're the best. And I always talk about Francisca Serem. She was working KPMG in the year 2006. She was voted the best employee in KPMG in the United States in that particular year. And the following year was Elizabeth and Jai. And so, you know, and then also, well, Rispa Gengo Haga, she's now the finance director of East African Brewery. She reminded me that when she was in Barclays, she was voted the best internal auditor in Barclays in the world. That's the quality of the work of you people. You've got to maintain the standards. You've got to be as good as them. And what I want is that when, you know, in the future, you know, a lot of, I was attending a meeting, really, a conference, one of these Zoom conferences last year, a number of chartered accountants in London. They were saying it's really difficult to get staff now. And I actually wrote on the thing because you couldn't speak there, okay? And they didn't take it, they didn't look at it. But I said, have you ever thought about recruiting from Kenya? But, you know, what I want is that just as Jim Ratcliffe, when he was going to get someone to run the marathon in under 2 hours, he came to Kenya and got Eliud Kipchoge, if you remember. He ran that day, I can't remember how many years ago it was. But even Tusker was selling in the bars that day at 159 shillings, 1 hour, 59 minutes. Okay, so, you know, and we're all watching there, okay, well, what I want is for people, when they're looking for accountants, they come to Kenya. We've got one country which is competing with us, and that's India. And ACCA is growing fastest, in fact, in India. But even their own institute, which has 430,000 people, they say by the year 2050, they want 2 million accountants in India. So they're actually growing the profession there. But in the UK, in the US, 300,000 accountants have left the profession in the last 2 years. They've either retired or in fact just simply gone into IT or whatever. But you know, the key to success, ladies and gentlemen, is hard work. We got to know our stuff, and we got to produce. And you know, I always say that Kenya is the land of talking. That's why Safaricom is the most profitable company. You know, if you just think of it, not for the shareholders, but you know, for the whole group, it's the most profitable company. But anyway, Martin Luther King, you know, he says, always have something in your pocket, and I don't mean lint. And you know, I just sent some money to a past student who, you know, she's in farming, but she doesn't have any money. She can't, you know, the thing is that she's got to get her produce to the market, but you've got to think about this in advance. You know, you can't come at the last moment and here I am, I want to give money to students, and I've got to give it to a past student who's in business, you know, and agriculture is business. But lint, you know, in your pocket at the end of the year, where you have the sort of things sewn together, there's some strands which come out. The lint is the strands in the pocket. Okay, that's what Martin Luther King means at that time. And you know, he was actually, when he was baptized Michael King, because the lady who was there in charge of giving names thought, well, you know, this guy is not really up to Martin Luther King. You know, Martin Luther is quite a famous guy and so on. So anyway, his dad, who's also Michael King, went along to the registry or whatever it is and says, look, I'm going to change my name to Martin Luther King, and my son is also going to be called Martin Luther King, so he's Martin Luther King Jr. And that leads me to a story about a lady who's trying to get her intended husband. She wants to get married next Tuesday. She's actually an accountant working in Kigali, and so it's a little bit difficult. She's here in Nairobi trying to get this thing sorted. But you know, to get anything through Sharia house today, ni ngumu zaidi, you know, so she's already spent, I think, something like 50,000 shillings trying to get things sorted out. But anyway, it's also a change of name that is needed there. Anyway, Big Mike was his father. He went and he got the name of himself and his son changed. And then also Martin Luther King's Rule 5, you know, the purpose of education, the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically, intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. And you know, the problem now in Kenya is that, well, we know that there is cheating in the KCSE. We know from, there's a Professor Ngui at the University of Nairobi. She will tell you that, you know, students get into medicine there through cheating, and then of course they can't last. They can't last. But cheating is rife now. And all this thing about having, you know, tanks and bazookas and policemen and exams in containers and so on is all useless. Why? Because in 2015, the principal of Alliance Girls was approached by someone in KNEC, and he said to her, you give me 3 million shillings and every one of your girls will get an A. Now, if you take Anne Erickson, who became the senior partner of PricewaterhouseCoopers, if you take Rose Ogega, who was the first lady, who was the chairman of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants, Anne-Marie Kathendu, who when she was doing her MBA in Johannesburg, she was the #1 class in in Wits Business School when she did her MBA. So, you know, that's the sort of woman who comes out of Alliance Girls. So it would not be surprising if everyone got an A. Anyway, she refused. That year, when Kabarak got 202 A's, Alliance Girls got 25. I told Matiangi in early 2016, and I'd spoken to Jacob Kaimeni the previous year, but he did nothing. But anyway, he actually then just eliminated all of the top people in KNEC, brought in his own exam, and lo and behold, Kabarak got 2 A's from 202 the previous year. Alliance Girls, out of the 142 A's that was produced in Kenya that year, 2016, Alliance Girls got 25. And they were not cheating, so in the previous year when they got that 25. And Kenya High, in 2015, they got 25, and out of the 142 A's in 2016, they actually got 26 A's. They were not cheating either. And I know one of our past students here was on the board of governors of Ngandu. And they were swearing at the teachers, what the hell do you think you're doing? You're letting, all these schools are doing so incredibly well, you know. Alliance gets an average of 96.8% over 300 students. In our system, to get that, something's going wrong. But anyway, the position here, okay, is that this is still what's going on. I spoke to Matiangi 2.5 years ago. He said he'd talk to Magoha, but Magoha, unfortunately, he's a past student of Strathmore actually, but you know, Matiangi was a doer. But you know, the thing is that here we have, you know, the best people in the world. Rispagenga, you know, I still remember that class, I can visualize it. It was such an incredible class. And she used to sit beside Nancy Kiriro, who is actually now in San Francisco, a big consultant there, okay? But these were people who are top leaders in the world. And, you know, we've got to understand that our education system was second to none. And we've got to maintain that. And it's not being maintained, unfortunately, because of corruption. But anyway, another thing that Martin Luther King said in rule number 6, in this case here, do not abandon your integrity. And this is so, so important, okay? Because, you know, unfortunately, how many people think about the future of Kenya? Anyway, let's go on to the next one. Capitalism. You know, Martin Luther King didn't think much about capitalism. If we go to the next slide, please. He believed in philanthropy. Why? Simply because, you know, as long as it does not cause the philanthropist to overlook the circumstances of economic injustice which makes philanthropy necessary. You know, because it may be that I'm making a hell of a profit, and I'm making that profit as a result of people. And in this particular case, well, we don't want philanthropy just simply to, as it were, right wrongs, like giving money to churches and things like that. I want to go to a lady called Joan Bavaria. Let's have the next slide, please. And this was a lady who, she had a rather unfortunate private life. She had 2 sons with her first husband, divorced him, married a second man, divorced him, married a third man, and they were married in 1981 the third time. She worked in the Bank of Boston. It's a very, very male-dominated place, but this is a woman who really got things going. And she then joined Franklin Management Corps, and there she, well, not only met her future husband, but also he then allowed her, if we can go on to the next slide, please. We then have that she set up her company, and in this particular case, it was Trillium Asset Management in 1982. And she wanted, you know, people to invest in companies which are not doing harm. If a company was, at that time, you've got to remember that apartheid was still working in South Africa. If a company was doing business with South Africa, in this case here, you know, they wouldn't be invested in. So anyway, she in fact is often referred to as the founding mother of socially responsible investing. Now you've got to remember that socially responsible investing, what you're doing is you're looking at the company to see how profitable that company is, but also what about the environment. I have to move very quickly here, ladies and gentlemen. I've told that I've only have 1 minute left, okay? But anyway, in this case here, I just point out in the next slide, okay, you'll get all of these slides, and I'll also give you a checklist for IFRS S1 and S2. We have another organization, which was the TELUS Institute, okay, on the next slide. It's a not-for-profit, and you know, in this particular case, there was a young man there who actually was taking this whole thing of making money, but also doing it in a way by which you could do that, you know, with responsibility for your workers, for your customers, all of those people around the world. We then have UNEP. And of course, you know, as soon as something of this nature comes about, the UN gets involved. And they've actually been involved in this area, okay, for 50 years now, you know, going right back to the 1970s. The next slide, please. Okay, we have UNEP there. And we, as you know, we've got the UNEP headquarters is here in Nairobi. It's quite an important source of foreign exchange for Kenya, in fact. Anyway, we then go to the next slide, and basically they're trying to get the root causes of the planetary crisis of climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and then also pollution. And well, UNEP actually came together with the TELUS Institute and also with Ceres, okay, to actually well, first of all, you have the development of the Sustainable Development Goals, okay? If we go to the next slide, please. And, you know, in this case, they were adopted in 2015 by 150, I think it was 153 countries all over the world, okay? And the idea was to reduce inequality, to build more peaceful, prosperous societies by 2030. Now we're running out of time, actually. I mean, for 2030. But anyway, in this case here, if we go to the next slide, okay, yeah. So they have the same idea as UNEP, okay? And if we go to the next slide, we have the first 9 of the Sustainable Development Goals. If you look at the 2024 2023 sustainability report produced by ABSA Bank, it's on the internet. You can get it very, very easily. It's a 62-page document. It's down from 17 the previous year. It's down to 62, a little bit more concise. But they actually mention all of the SDGs, all 17 of them. But you will get, for example, Safaricom, they concentrate on 9. Kakuzi concentrates on 9. Sasini concentrates on a different 9. Even though the Sasini and Kakuzi are in the same industry, they actually concentrate on. But in this particular case, no poverty, zero hunger. These things are just you know, very, very abbreviated ideas here. If we go to the next slide, we then have the final from 10 to 17, and you can see the final one there is partnership for the goals. And this is something which is rather important. Now, the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, okay, is something which is very important. Why? Well, when you want to, let's suppose you're working in a company quota in the Nairobi Securities Exchange, you now have to actually produce an ESG report. And this ESG report has got to be in conformance with, in compliance with, a booklet that they have actually produced. You can get that booklet from the NSC website very easily. I could send it to you. Maybe I should send it to you with this particular presentation. Now what happens here, okay, is that, you know, the GRI is one of the bodies which you have to actually comply with. And it's a little bit difficult, it's stringent. But anyway, in this case here, the GRI came out of Ceres, TELUS, and UNEP. So it now is a very, very important organization to know something about. And then I'll tell you in the next slide, okay, just some things about the GRI guidelines. They have offices all over the world. They had a big presentation in Kenya earlier this year. They're very, very keen. Well, they worked with the Nairobi Securities Exchange to make sure that the GRI are actually included in the requirements of the NSE. And you can see there they've now got locations. They used to be in Boston, Massachusetts. They then, in 2002, they went over to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam, and they've now got an office in Brazil, China, India, US, South Africa, Colombia, and Singapore. India have actually produced their own environmental reporting standards, in fact. We then go on in 2016, okay, if we go to the next one, please. That's it. Okay, in 2016, GRI, instead of guidelines, they started setting standards. And now they've got a whole lot of standards. You can see them there. You know, time is running away with me. One other thing, if we go to the next slide, is we've also heard of the triple bottom line. Now, I mention the triple bottom line just because it's something that has been Kenyanized, as it were. You know, if we go, next slide, please. We have Elkington, who, you know, he was the one who actually coined this phrase in 1994 when he had a management consultancy called Sustainability. If we go to the next slide, okay, you're talking about the triple bottom line, you know, in other words, people, planet, and profit, right down to the bottom of that slide. On the next slide, we have, on the 25th of March 2015, Isaac Kawanda, who was the managing director of whatever bank it was that Uhuru owns, in fact, he actually presented to Uhuru the Mwongozo. And in there they talk about the triple bottom line, okay? And in this case here, I lay it out there. The board should include a sustainability report in the half-yearly and annual report and disclose if the organization is a going concern based on the triple bottom line concept. In other words, profitability, people, and also the environment. I was trying to get some of these entities their reports to see if they actually do that. You know, in this particular case, they don't actually do that. I want to continue for a little bit, okay, because now I must have the man on the thing there with me, okay? Next slide, please. Come on, make Kenya work, okay? Accountability, okay? That's one of the organizations. I can't say anything about it. Let's go on to the next one. The Carbon Disclosure Project, CPD. Next one. Next one. That's it. Okay, the Carbon Disclosure. That's another of these bodies, okay? In 2022, 18,700 organizations disclose their environmental information through CDP, okay? The next one, corporate register. That's just simply, let's suppose there's an important thing here actually, because you know the banks in Kenya are required, because we've actually adopted the the reporting financial institutions have a responsibility to file financial account information with KRA every year. Now this doesn't apply to Tom, Dick and Owino, but it does apply to corporations which are going to have more than $1 million in their accounts. So it's just that I think it's important. This is something that has been adopted right across the world. It's not as if KRA is jumping on our throats or anything, but they are actually getting in there at that point. If we go to the next one, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is another of the ESG bodies. If we go to the next one, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board is important because it's actually mentioned in IFRS S1. So their standards were quite widely adopted in the US and also in the UK. But in this particular case, what happens is that, they are important, but now what happens is they're part of the International Sustainability Standards Board. If we go to the next one, okay, you have SASB and the London-based International Integrated Reporting Council. They combined to form the Value Reporting Foundation, and then the IFRS Foundation took them over, and that was completed in August 2022. If we go to the next one then, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, this is a little bit important because banks in Kenya now have to use the principles of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure to a report on a quarterly basis, on or before the 10th day of April, on or before the 10th day of July, on or before the 10th day of October, and on or before the 10th day of January, on their management of ESG matters in the quarter. To my mind, it is overreach. What kind of, okay, if, for example, a bank is lending to an agricultural company and we have a drought, or we have floods, or, for example, you have rain up in Kericho and Sotik and those places, if you have hail, it's going to destroy the tea crop, but it'll grow back again pretty quickly. You just don't want sustained hail. That's the problem. But anyway, it will, in this case here, there is that climate-related risk. But a bank, the banks are making more profit this year when businesses are not making profits than they were last year. So I feel that the CBK, you just want to be the same as the European Central Bank. So anyway, that's all here in here. My masters have told me I've got to stop lecturing, but I need to get to something. You've got to let me go. Let's go on to the next slide. And well, the UN gets, there are UN, we've got about 5 different UN agencies involved in ESG reporting. You've got the UN Global Compact, the United Nations Commission for Development, is also involved there. You've got UNEP. So they want to create work for themselves. So what they do is they get involved in this process. So you then have the UN Global Compact on the next slide, okay? And then, we want to jump over that. We then get to the international, just jump a few slides, please. Yeah. Now, this is a little bit important. Why? It's just that, in Kenya, you have a number of companies, quoted the Nairobi Securities Exchange, which produce an integrated report. And it is not an integrated report. I could name the companies for you, but there may be some of my past students. I know one lady is actually the chief financial officer of one of those companies, so I better not name it. But anyway, they're calling their report an integrated report. It's not. And let me just get to this now. Next slide. Okay, so let's just go on a bit. Next slide, please. Integrated thinking is very important, because a lot of people, they do greenwashing. They say we're doing this, but in fact they're not. And you know what I mean for Kenya. So anyway, in this case here, if we go on to the next one. Now the reason why, the Capital Markets Authority has laid down that quoted companies have to actually move towards integrated reporting. So it's a requirement. And if we just go to the next slide, okay, the very last line there, an integrated report should be concise. Well done, Safaricom. Equity, try to reduce your 33 pages. They're incredible reading. You've done a wonderful job, but it's got to be concise. If we go to the next one, this is the important thing, okay? If we go back one, all organizations depend on various forms of capital for their success. In the integrated reporting framework, the capitals comprise financial, manufactured, intellectual, human, social and relationship, and natural. Now some report only on 5, because they say, well, human and intellectual is the same, or human and social and relationship is the same. But in this particular case, the framework says you can do anything you like, but you must report on those capitals. If you don't report on those capitals, you do not have an integrated report. I've gone only halfway that I thought I would, but you know, I have got, I'm now no longer the one mkubwa, so I have to do what I'm told. So, but anyway, I think we've come to a very important part, ladies and gentlemen. It's simply, but you know, the NSC has actually said, you know, what they say in their booklet has got to appear in an integrated ESG report. Now, do they mean integrated reporting is now compulsory? It's difficult to know. We'll have to get Frank Wheaty, who's also, he was telling me, you know, he remembered once in a class, there was a lady at the back talking, and I smashed the board. He was telling me about that on Friday evening when we were chatting. And, but anyway, in this case here, Frank Wheaty needs to, you know, clarify now. If you are working in a quoted company, must you produce an integrated report? If the answer is yes, it's got to deal with those 6 capitals. And, you know, a couple of years ago, one of the companies, I won't mention the name, the word capital appeared 153 times. And it was not an integrated report. Why? Because they were talking, they had a couple of references to human capital, but all the rest of the capital was purely financial. But go to Safaricom, I'll send you all of these reports actually with this thing here, so that you can have a kind of a portfolio of things to see as a result of this particular lecture, because I can't do you justice because, well, you know, we had a lot of payukering at the beginning and I was telling you jokes rather than teaching you. I apologize. I better nyamaza because this man is going to do it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.